Does Eloise say y'all?
I have never heard her say that yet, but I'm sure it'll happen at some point.
Hi, and welcome to Motherhood Around the World, a podcast that celebrates mums everywhere and dives into the nuance of parenting in different countries. Today we have with us Maggie, born in the US and raised in Houston, Texas, where she lives with her husband and daughter, aged 4. She's board certified in internal medicine and works full-time as a primary care physician. I met Maggie when she was in Paris recently, and our discussion planted the seed that eventually turned into the idea for this show. So it's such a pleasure to have her with us today. Welcome, Maggie.
Thank you for having me.
You've always lived in the US.
I have.
And your husband's also American?
He is American as well, yes.
They say it takes a village to raise a child. What does your village look like over there? What's your support system?
You're absolutely right. I think it does take a village to raise our kids. My husband and I both work. We're both physicians. And so I'm very lucky that I live close to my parents who do help me, but I also have help from other folks. So I have a full-time nanny who's amazing and helps me. My daughter goes to school full-time. Things like that really are what helps make us our unit and helps us function in the way that we can and do all our jobs, be the parent, be the doctor, all those things.
Tell me a little bit about your journey to pregnancy.
Sure. I was pretty fortunate that I didn't have much difficulty, I would say, with pregnancy, getting pregnant. Of course, it's different for everyone. And I will say in the US, certainly we have great medical care and access to reproductive assistance. It's not accessible to the masses. It's people with means, people with insurance plans that accommodate for that. Because if you don't, it's really expensive here. So me personally, everything happened naturally as it should. But I will say for other folks in the US who are struggling, it's for people with resources, which is tough.
And we're talking tens of thousands of dollars sometimes, right?
Absolutely. Tens of thousands of dollars. And of course, it's not always that the first round takes, right? And so that can be a really long journey for folks and can really put them into a financially challenging position to go into parenthood, which we all know costs a lot of money as well to begin with.
The getting pregnant is just the first part of the costs.
Right, exactly. It's the tip of the iceberg. It's just where the things start. And so I think there is more awareness. I think that they're trying to make things more accessible. Certainly in the medical field, I have more friends who are OBGYNs who are interested in or are becoming or opening fertility practices and trying to figure out how to make their services more accessible to folks. But there's definitely a lot of expense involved at this juncture, and it's a tough place.
What fertility or healthcare support was available to you if you had needed it?
I think for me, because I work for a big healthcare system and we have access to gynecologists, I think they do offer egg freezing if that is something that you need to or want to do. I don't know quite all the loopholes that you have to jump through to get access to that, but I do think they offer that along with IVF and care along the way. But again, it's not a federally mandated thing that everyone is given access to that. It's truly employer based, which leaves a lot of room for loopholes and people not wanting to offer extra fertility services.
You said it's not federally based, it's employer based, but also you have the state level. You're based in Texas at the moment.
Yeah.
How are people feeling in Texas? How are women feeling in Texas about their choices?
Not great, I would say. It's a really tough time. For some reason in the US, reproductive health has become it's so political. It's so much of religion plays so much into it, which even though our country is founded on this idea of separation of church and state, there is so much influence of religion governing politics, which is, in my opinion, awful just because everyone comes from a different background. And, I'm a healthcare provider. So I feel what happens between my patient and I should be between my patient and I, and not between federal organizations, state level organizations, things like that. But yeah, it's really tough. The right to abortion was turned over in the US recently. So now it's up to the states. And if states are conservative or have Republicans in power, generally there's been bans on abortion and they vary by weeks. But I mean, some places it's as strict as 6 weeks. And I mean, a lot of women don't even know they're pregnant at 6 weeks, right? If you're,
I didn't the first time.
yeah, I think basically I knew at like 6 or 7, and the dates weren't quite accurate when we were doing things later down the line. And that's a really crazy tough place to be. And so unfortunately it's really tough where we'll have patients that come in that I'm a primary care doctor. I'm not an OBGYN, but if a patient is pregnant and doesn't want to carry the pregnancy for whatever reason, they have to go to a state that allows for that. And that requires money and resources, right? And a lot of people don't have that. And so it's a really hard place to be. And I think as a woman that obviously from this conversation, I'm very pro-choice because, and I recognize not everyone feels that way, but I think it's a really tough time in the US to be a woman. We're not given the support that we should have.
Yeah. Come to France. We just put it in the Constitution.
I know you guys did. I know. I wish I could. It's a really tough time when it comes to being able to plan your family and make decisions about your own reproductive health and what you want or what you don't want on an individual level.
How were you supported during your pregnancy and birth?
During pregnancy, there's not a lot of support on, like I said, a state level, a national level. I mean, you're pregnant and you got to talk to your employer yourself about pregnancy. And I even remember, even though I work for a wonderful organization, I felt nervous about having that conversation just because for some reason we feel as women that we're like inconveniencing everyone and putting a burden on everyone else around us. So that's tough. I will say most of your support is you go to your routine prenatal care, which when you are pregnant, you have the right to access to prenatal care in the US. We do have federal programs that provide support to moms and babies in pregnancy and after delivery up to a certain amount of time. I don't know the exact numbers off the top of my head, so I don't want to say the incorrect thing, but there is some federal programs that allow for prenatal and postnatal care, which is super important. But yeah, I mean, I can tell you, I worked up until, 3 days before I had a baby and I saw my patients and did all my things. And I was fortunate. I had a healthy pregnancy and no major complications or issues that put me out earlier. And then I actually elected to have an induction. This is planned to the wazoo, but I stopped 3 days before. The one day I took off on a Friday, I did some nice things with my mother and a girlfriend, and then went in and had a baby and was out on leave.
What was your maternity situation with work?
I really have wonderful partners who were very supportive, and they're all parents too. And while their kids were older, they have some recollection of, what it was like during that time. It's like I went out on leave, and I can tell you that my leave basically gave, I think you got, what's it called? Short-term disability leave for 6 weeks if you have a vaginal delivery, 8 weeks if you have a cesarean section. So there's a difference there. And then after that, you're tapping into, if you want to be paid, your paid time off. And so as a physician, I get 5 weeks. And so I think in total, I took 10 weeks off before coming back to work. And that was that. But I had my daughter in March of 2020, which was when COVID happened. So my delivery, I was very lucky. I actually had her just a couple days before the world went on lockdown, but it was already getting a little funny in town. And especially being in medicine, I kind of knew what was happening on the other end. All I remember is, so in Houston, we have the rodeo, which is a big fair kind of thing. And they have cowboys doing horseback riding events, and there's concerts, and there's a big fair and all these things. And all of a sudden I heard that the Houston rodeo had shut down. And that's when we all knew, we're like, oh my God, the world's ending.
This is not our first rodeo.
Exactly. And so I remember talking to my OBGYN and I said, you know what? Just discharge us. I will call you if there's an issue. And so we went home and we basically went on lockdown. And so that was kind of a weird time because we didn't know what was going on. I had a newborn, and when you have a newborn, I think everyone's pretty wary about germs and trying to get a newborn baby through the first month of life, because it's the biggest deal. If a baby gets sick and gets the fever in the first 4 weeks, you got to go back to the hospital, and there's a lot of really invasive testing that needs to be done. So we were on a little bit extra alert of what can we do to keep everyone safe? So we were home. And then the wrinkle was that my husband's an emergency room doctor. And so
Of course, you were at home safe, but he couldn't be doing the same thing. Does he get paternity leave? Did he get paternity leave?
so no paternity leave for him. He is a independent contractor, which means that he works for himself, and then he is part of a group that then is contracted with our hospital system. So he doesn't have any vacation or paternity leave. It's really just about how many shifts he works a month. And so initially we had planned for him to take a week or two or something like that to be home, and he had like stacked his shifts so he would work early in the month and then pushed it to late in the month. But people were kind of dropping like flies. The volume was really high of people getting sick and coming in. And initially you could only get tested in the emergency room. There wasn't point of care testing we could do at home, or you couldn't go to your primary office or anything. And so,
Oh my God, it's giving me all flashbacks.
yeah, so it was weird times. And so he got called in 2 days after I had my daughter, and like, it's okay, you do it. I was lucky I had my parents with me, and so they were my little bubble. And then I also had a night nurse who helped me at the time, who was a godsend. She really was just an angel and really helped me through a lot of things too. Anywho, so he had to go back in, and it was a funny time because back then we did all kinds of what seemed important and necessary but kooky now, where it was like
Washing your groceries.
yeah, wipe down your groceries. I remember we would have him like take off your clothes in the garage, run into the house. There was a shower on the first floor. Take a shower, thinking that did something. It was sad though. Like, he was nervous about kissing the baby. He didn't want like respiratory contact, and goodness gracious, nobody's a germaphobe. We deal with germs all day long. It's completely fine. But it was a hard time.
It was a different time.
It really was.
Imagining the things we were worried about, it was just very heightened stress level. And especially with a week-old baby at home.
It was hard. There wasn't a lot of extra support because nobody could go and be with each other. I remember I had these dreams of what maternity leave was going to look like. I'm going to go to lunch and brunch. That just sounds wonderful. And we're going to do all these things. And then, of course, none of that happened. So we were just home together, which in some ways I missed nothing because there was nothing happening in the world. But yeah, it was unusual times. So
you still missed the opportunity to spend that time with your friends, with the newborn, do a sip and see, like, I'm assuming.
Or even like, what I really missed that I would have loved to have done was the mommy and me classes. After you have a baby in the US, I mean, depending on obviously where you're coming from with things, there are some things that like ordinarily your doctor, your pediatrician, they might have some events for new moms to teach about breastfeeding or learning about baby care, right? And none of that was happening. Mommy and me classes like music class, or goodness knows, like in the US, I know there are exercise classes for mom where you can bring your baby and run back and forth and do sprints back and forth to your baby.
That sounds super fun. Definitely sign me up for that next time I have a baby.
I don't know, but I didn't do any of that because it wasn't happening. And so, so it was kind of an unusual time. Now, fortunately, obviously things have gotten better. That virus is mutated, still around for sure, but we're able to gather and do things. And now all that stuff's back in action. But yeah, it was not around in 2020, when you and I were, had our newborns.
Did you find it easy or hard to choose names?
I feel like the name I chose, my daughter's Eloise, is kind of French. Names are kind of a fun thing. In the US, there's all kinds of traditions. For a long time, people did family names, and you'll meet people who are John the Second, the Third, the Junior, the Senior, all the varieties of that. That's not really a tradition in my family per se. There's no multiples, but I wanted something that was inspired by a family member, but wasn't necessarily their specific name. So my daughter's name is Eloise. My grandfather, who has since passed, I was very close with. His name was Leo, L-E-O. So Eloise has L-E-O in it. And then her middle name is Claire. That was my husband's grandmother's name. So it was kind of a family-ish inspired name, but it was new.
Are there rules over there? Can the registry office say no to certain names? Because in France, they can. There's band name, and they can also reject something. I think recently someone wanted to call their baby something like the letter M, and they just said no.
So I do think there actually are some rules against your name. Like, I don't think it can have profanity in it, or like a bad word, but Elon Musk's kiddos' names are a bunch of, I don't even know it, but they're like a bunch of letters and
Oh, it's a
numbers and
symbol,
symbols.
right? Yeah.
Yeah. So obviously there's a lot of, you're given a lot of creative liberty to how you want to name your kiddo. I always feel like when you pick a name, you always have a million names for the gender that you're not having. And then it's really hard to find a name for the gender that you might be having.
I told my obstetrician the name. I didn't know if I was having a boy or a girl either time. And with my second pregnancy, she said, "Do you have any names?" I said, "If it's a boy, I'm going to call him Roger, but in French, it's Roger." And she turned
Yes.
around. She said, "I hope you're having a girl."
Ooh, that's pretty spicy.
It's just so old fashioned. My husband was absolutely against it, and I was absolutely for it. And I had a girl.
That's so funny.
Did you make any friends while you were pregnant?
I actually had one person that I became good friends with we were pregnant at the exact same time and we had kids a week apart. And it was a mutual friend set us up and said, "Hi, you guys are both pregnant at the same time and you should be friends." I think a lot of people do make mom friends from those classes and things where you have almost like a newborn together and bond through that experience. Because of that, I just didn't get it. But when my daughter was old enough to start school, I started her at 18 months. I met a lot of mom friends that way. And so now I have this great network of moms that on the weekends and things, there's always activities, and it's so nice to be able to, whatever the activity is, just be together and deal with the craziness as a village, as you say,
Yeah, together.
as opposed to doing it on your own.
What age do people generally start childcare over there?
I started her at like 18 months, which, everyone here has a different setup. I was lucky and fortunate to be able to have a nanny with my daughter at home until she was 18 months. Other folks, in terms of kind of child care early on, there are daycares available starting at, I think, as young as 6 or 8 weeks kind of thing. I will say my employer does support that. It's not free, but it's heavily subsidized. So that is a resource. They do offer, but again, employer dependent, not state or federally supported. And so if you don't have means, it's really tough. I think people really rely on other family as their network to allow them to work.
Is there any stigma around childcare either way, whether you choose to do it or choose not to do it?
I feel like we're finally in a place where it's more the norm for women to go back to work. I'm not sure that was the case a generation ago. I think back to my mother and she worked, but I think a lot of women didn't work. And I feel like most of my friends work. Now, some people have multiple children and financially it doesn't make sense for them the childcare cost here is really high. And so there is a financial component to it. But I feel like more and more women are in the workforce in some capacity. And whether you choose to send your child to daycare or you have family or a nanny, I think it's just personal choice and what you can afford. Again, all of this, unfortunately, is, I think most of it's financially driven. At a certain point, I think school comes into play, which my feeling was always like, school's great. It's how your kid learns social skills and starts learning.
What age do kids start school over there? And did your experience of school align with your daughter's experience?
So my daughter goes to a school that started at pre-K3 now. The public schools are covered for everyone starting at kindergarten, which is age 5 here in the US. There is pre-K available at some of these public schools, but it's not guaranteed for everybody. So not everyone gets a spot in pre-K4. And there's a lot of different variables that play into it. A lot of it is where you live and what your neighborhood or city offers you. So there's a spectrum. I would say everyone's in school by age 5. A lot of people are in school at age 4. And then if you have resources, younger than that.
What do you need to provide for the school? Do you have to send packed lunches? Do the kids get fed when they're there?
Yeah. So my daughter's school that I sent her to starting at 18 months, I packed a lunch and a lunch and a snack. So that I did provide. Now she goes to a school where lunch is part of tuition. Her lunch, her snack, all that stuff is included. So I don't have to pack anything.
And what's the level of food? What do they get?
It's a good question. I always ask my daughter, what'd you have for lunch? And I get radio silence sometimes. Oh gosh, I don't know. I know there's always a sandwich option. If the kid is picky and doesn't want that, they can go pick up a sandwich, but it's chicken tenders and French fries, hot dog, noodles.
Stop playing into our stereotypical.
I know.
expectations.
It probably is super American, really unhealthy food, right? Maybe someday we'll do a touch base in a few years, update on the podcast, and I can be like, actually, the food is really healthy and gourmet.
Yeah, she's eating organic spinach 3 times a day.
I don't think there's a salad on her plate at 4 years old now. I would hope I think there probably is I'm hoping there's a fruit, a veggie, and a protein on the plate, but sometimes I ask her, what did she have for lunch? And she tells me French fries.
You know what? She's eating, she's growing. We're good.
Yeah. And, we definitely try to provide healthy meals at home. And yeah, I do think that the school, I don't know, I've been there. I've looked at the food. It looks pretty nice. It looks way better than what was in a cafeteria when I was young. Fortunately, we fall into the American stereotype with food and public school. It's probably a really mixed bag. And again, I think that is state dependent. That is city dependent. Funding is a very local thing. And so I know from like my patients who have kiddos that go to public school who are really involved on their boards, things like how many kids show up at school every day makes a big deal because it's how much money that they get from the state to fund their individual school. So that trickles all the way down to school lunches.
Wow. Yeah. We don't even have school boards here. That's a whole nother podcast we could do on American school boards.
Yeah. School boards. So it's a whole thing. I think at the public school level, they do offer things like breakfast and lunch to make sure that kids are getting their meals. I think this current administration does emphasize access to school lunches. Our First Lady, Dr. Jill Biden, is an educator. And so there is emphasis on getting resources to that. But I think back to our Obama administration, Mrs. Obama, Michelle, she made funding healthy school lunches her big campaign. It was, like the Let's Move campaign and get healthy. And I think at that juncture, a lot of what was being served in school lunches, there was some change that happened at that point, which was great.
What are your options when your daughter gets sick? How do you muddle through?
Yeah. It's always hard, right? Oh, that's the worst when the dominoes fall. It's a mix. Like I said, I'm lucky. I have a full-time nanny. I am leaving my home at 7 a.m. every morning and I come back. I'm lucky. I'm home by like 4:35 every day. And so if my daughter is sick and needs to stay home, most of the time our nanny can help us. That's a luxury. Most people do not have that option. I also have parents who are in town. So my mother and father are the backup. And then theoretically, the backup to the backup is, well, not theoretically. I mean, the backup to the backup is me. I have to call out of work and I have to move patients and do what I can. It's my husband tries to help, but he has to find people to fill his shift and it's an emergency room. And so it needs to be staffed all the time. And so it falls on my shoulders to figure out those logistics. And that's a tough one, but we make it work the best of our ability, just like everyone does.
Did children do lots of activities over there?
Oh my gosh, kids are so programmed here. It is just crazy. Yes. I mean, starting from, like I mentioned in the beginning, music class and all the things. Kids are really programmed here. My daughter goes to school starts at 8 a.m. It ends at 2:45. She'll have an activity from 2:45 to 3:45 pretty much every day of the week. And then sometimes on the weekends. I've really tried to make it a point at this juncture not to schedule activities on the weekend because I just like to have flexibility. I rather make a play date or try to be a little spontaneous and just do whatever we need to do. Or we like to travel, right?
Or even have a sleep in.
Yeah, right. Have a sleep in. That sounds amazing. Gosh, I mean, I have friends who have little boys and goodness knows baseball starts at 3 and those boys are doing baseball practice multiple times a week. And sometimes it's kind of late at night. So there are a lot of activities that happen for kids.
I'm assuming you have a car. Are you constantly driving?
Yes. So Houston, unfortunately, is not a pedestrian friendly city. There are lots of cities. There are some cities on the East Coast where I've lived all over the US and I've lived in Philadelphia, and places like New York, very pedestrian friendly. It's more abnormal to have a car. But where I live, oh my gosh, yeah, a lot of car time. It is very stereotypical. Most people have big cars, and so you're lugging all the toddler junk everywhere. I have a girl, so I've been spared a little bit of the sports equipment. But my friends who have boys, it's like, goodness knows, you open the trunk and there's like baseball bats and hockey sticks and football padding and things that spilling out of the cars. There's a lot of driving that happens here.
With that many activities, does that actually start to form part of your social circle and your weekend plans?
Yeah. I think that's a way that a lot of people, your kids make friends with other people that are on their teams, that are in their activities. You make mom friends that way. All those activities are social networks. And a lot of times, even though it's a big city, people tend to live in their neighborhoods, right? And you see the same people at all the activities. So you get to know people that way.
Yeah, I'm just picturing like dance moms.
Yeah, I'm not that level. But there are those ladies out there for sure.
I love it. I think if I was in the US, I would be leaning in.
Yeah.
What do you do for holidays? Specifically, how much time do you get off? Do you have childcare during the holidays? How does it work?
For example, the winter holiday time, my daughter will be out of school for 2 weeks, typically between Christmas and New Year's. Sometimes it feels like more than that, but I think 2 to 2.5 weeks.
It always feels longer.
Yeah, right. It always feels long. No school, so no built-in childcare. Again, another reason why I have a nanny. My office is open all the time, so I work through Christmas and New Year's. I do get time off that I can choose to use or not use throughout the year, but it's not a dedicated holiday time. My office is closed. I get Christmas Day off. I think if it falls on a weekend, we get a bonus. So if it falls on a Sunday, we get extra Monday off. New Year's, we get New Year's Day off. And the same thing applies if it's on a weekend, on a Sunday, you get Monday off. But that scramble again to figure out how you're going to make it work. And we have a wonderful nanny, but of course, she gets vacation too, which she well deserves, and she travels to visit her family then. And a lot of times she's actually from Belize. She's Belizean, and she travels to Belize and likes to go for long periods of time, which I don't blame her. When I travel, I like to take a good amount of time too. So when she travels, I'm very reliant on my parents. And of course, I have to be eternally grateful and appreciative to getting help then, because it's hard, because there's often no activities. There's not a lot going on. So you're full on child duty during those holiday times.
How much time off do you get from work in a year?
So I think the total is 25 days of paid time off. So which is 5 weeks.
Not bad.
Yeah, not bad at all, right? Which I'm grateful for. And I can sprinkle it throughout the year however I choose. There are times where people will load up during the holiday time. Now, being in medicine, we can't all take off the same holidays every time, and we do call and things like that. So we're very democratic about the whole thing. We rotate through the holidays every year, and it's fine. I've been with the same group of people for 7 years now, so everyone's good with that. But my husband has to work a lot during the holidays, and we all kind of trade off and figure out how we can all help out from there.
What language do you speak with Eloise?
So we speak English, which that's where we are. I speak Spanish as well. I mean, I grew up in Houston, Texas. We have a wonderful Hispanic culture in our city. So I've been very lucky that I started learning Spanish from early school days and have kept it up throughout. So she does once a week Spanish classes, which I really want to stick. But really fluently in the home, it's English, and anything else we can get in is good.
What's the split on housework in your family?
Oh, yeah, that's always a funny one. My family likes to say I'm the queen of delegation, and that's how I make it all work.
Delegating is a job.
Yeah, it is a job, right?
Household organization and delegation falls as a specific task, I believe.
Yeah. I certainly do a lot of it. Our nanny helps out too. That's not her job, but she does pitch in and help me with things, especially related to my daughter. But then I have help that I bring in, a housekeeper who comes and helps out too. My husband tries. It's not an even split. And it's not that he doesn't want to necessarily or won't. I don't know. It's just how things have fallen out. But, he's gone a lot and he works a lot of weird shifts because being in the ER, you work nights, you work days, you work all kinds of things. There's not a lot of consistency with his schedule. So being the one in charge of, I don't know, taking out the trash every week, he may be working overnight on Monday night when the trash needs to go out. So I would say more of the making sure it all gets done falls on me. But, when he's home, he chips in and helps. And then I have a team that helps me too. And that's what makes it all work.
Love the team.
Yeah.
What's the split on parenting? Are you more together as a team or take turns being lead parent?
In an ideal world, I want us to be a team, right? And I think when we are together, we are definitely a team. But because of my husband's work schedule, I have a very standard schedule. I work Monday through Friday. I leave the house at 7, getting back for 4:30. I'll see my daughter, get up in the morning, get things going. And then when she gets home from school is about when I'm getting home, or getting home from activity, I should say, is about when I'm getting home from work too. And then I'm there to do dinner, bath, books, bedtime, all those kinds of things. Because my husband's schedule is so erratic, he sometimes will be able to be home in the middle of the day and go to the school for school activities and things like that when I can't be the parent to go to lunch or do the school activities. He's sometimes able to show up, but there's a lot of times that he's not home in the evening. So it's my daughter and I would say it's more of a you pick who's available kind of tag team situation where we each try to step up to the plate.
Work with what you've got.
Exactly. It's like I love vacation time and it's sometimes almost funny because we're just like, oh, we're all together. This is great.
What do we do?
And,
Oh my gosh. What do we talk about?
Yeah, exactly. We go a little bit back and forth on things, but we talk a lot, right? And thank goodness for FaceTime. We can sometimes during bedtime routine, we'll FaceTime my husband to bring him in and do that kind of thing. So
yeah. What is bedtime generally for Eloise?
Generally, we try to get her in bed by 8 and we'll start bedtime process at 7 p.m. But it depends on the day. Sometimes it's earlier. I don't love it when it's after 8 p.m. I know you guys do things so much later. We're in France, but yeah, we are earlier here in the U.S. Dinner is 5:36 for kids. I will say, like, when we go out to dinner, I usually book like a 6 or 6:30 p.m. reservation. But I know, like in France, like restaurants are like hardly even open then for those kinds of seatings.
Yeah, you'll never have trouble getting a reservation here at 6:30 because no one else wants to be there. You could go.
Exactly.
You can get like a Michelin star at 6 and no one else will. The restaurant.
Exactly. I feel like my very first trip to France, it was rookie mistake of I didn't know when people were dining, and I think I made 6:37, and we'd walk in and I was like, nobody's here. This is so strange. This place is supposed to be so happening. And then of course, an hour later, everyone's rolling in.
Exactly. What does a typical weekend look like in your family?
I would say an average weekend is, like I said, I try not to sign up for activities on weekends, but other people might have soccer shots or ballet class or things like that. For us, we get up, we do breakfast. Somebody might have a birthday party. The birthday party circuit is, there's a strong birthday party circuit here. Lots of birthdays. So you see everyone you went to school with during the week on Saturday morning at whatever birthday party activity.
Oh my God, when I come and visit you, can I please come with you to an American, like a Texan birthday party?
Gosh. Yes, they're crazy. And I'm part of the problem. I love it. I love doing the party thing for kids. It's fun. Yeah. So usually there's like a birthday party Saturday morning. Sometimes I'll meet up with friends and we could do lunch or something. It varies. And then I live really close to my family. So sometimes I'll have dinner with my parents or we'll make play dates with other families and we can I like to take my daughter out to eat. It's something before having kids that I was always a big part of my social life and enjoyment. And so I'll take her out to any kind of restaurant. And I think if you have more kids, it gets harder to do that in the US. But for me, I just take her with me and I bring activities and she's pretty good at dining out. So we'll do that. Sunday, sometimes it can be repeat. I like to have a leisurely morning. I don't know. We'll, drive around, find activities to do and kind of go from there.
How does society view kids in the USA? Are kids welcome everywhere, or do you kind of have to go to like kid-specific playgrounds, restaurants, etc.?
I think it varies, and I think there's definitely a separation. I really take her to a lot of things with me, but I wouldn't say that's as common for maybe other families, especially if you have a lot of kids. It's just hard, right? And so Houston's a pretty casual city, so I really can't think of much where a kid really would be like, say, no kids. I actually find more when I've traveled around Europe, when I've tried to look into restaurants, I feel like I find more restaurants where it'll say like no kids under 12 or things like that. And I really can't think of a restaurant here that would have that policy in place. So kids are welcome, but I think it's up to your judgment a little bit of like, do you really want to bring your kid to do that activity with you or not?
Being a mom can be isolating. What local community or support networks do you have around you?
You're absolutely right. I think that it can be super isolating. For me, I lean heavily into friends and family. School, again, I think is a big community. And even if you're engaged in some of the wonderful public schools in our city, that helps you form a network. Most don't start until, like I said, 4 or 5 years old. That's a long time. So it's tough. I think here a lot of religious organizations create great communities for people, and that's a big thing. I'm excited for like when my daughter can be a Girl Scout. That'll be fun. You can do things like that.
You just want the cookies.
I know, right? I just want to be a cookie mom, right? I think people kind of lean into religious organizations early on because there'll be a lot of mommy and me events or family oriented events. And again, school groups were my big support. And then just having other friends who either have kids or don't, but were fine with me. I would just say like, hey, come over to my house and let's hang out, have dinner, and we want to watch Top Chef together or some kind of show. Great. Our kids can run around and have a play date and have fun, and we can still be grown-ups and have a glass of wine and do our thing. Beyond that stuff, though, I can't really think of anything that kind of looped me in early on.
And is there any government support for families?
There's some tax credits out there you can grab.
Great. Have more kids. Have more kids.
Yeah, I know. So I don't know if that's the greatest reason to expand a family necessarily. Like I said, there are programs to make sure that your child gets access to healthcare, to make sure that you have access to food stamp programs and things like that. So our program for children at risk is called Medicaid. So there are those kinds of things. Obviously, public school is part of that algorithm, which is so important and great. But so much of it is individual, which is really hard. Again, it's for people with means to make that happen. And there's a huge quality that sits in that process.
Which leads perfectly to my next question. Is there anything you would change at a policy level?
Oh, so many, right? I'm sure everyone can gather from my comments so far.
Maggie for president.
Yeah. Oh, no. I'll stick with my current job. I love what I do. And I think from the get-go, access to being able to make your own choices in family planning, right to abortion, right to infertility treatment, social support to allow people access to childcare from the get-go, starting public school earlier on. All of these things are what breed happy, healthy families, happy, healthy children, which then turn into healthier, more productive adults and really fuel society. I mean, we're a country founded on capitalism and all that, which has its role and is great. But you look at health outcomes, we spend so much in healthcare dollars and our outcomes are, they're just okay. You look at places, the example is always Scandinavia of like the best outcomes for happiest, healthiest people. And they have universal healthcare and there is some value in that. And that's a super controversial thing to say in the United States because it really pushes a lot of buttons. But the way our system is just, it just doesn't work. And even for people who do have means, the cost of medicines and in gosh knows appointments and everything. I mean, sometimes I laugh and I say insurance is a suggestion. It doesn't really cover everything. And so we have a lot of room to grow and make improvements in the US. So many things.
What are your favorite traditions in the US?
Favorite tradition? Well, said I love a good party and things like that. We do holidays well here. We do Halloween, we do Valentine's Day, we do 4th of July is a fun, that's, Independence Day here. That is a fun event that communities really go all out for. So I love engaging in all those kinds of things for sure.
What do you love most about being a mom in America?
I think that being a mom in the US, we are the land of opportunity. And my child, I really do feel could do anything and be anything in the world. And maybe even, right, like be president of the United States. I think a female president is coming at some juncture, whatever side of the aisle you sit on. That I think is a real possibility. So I feel so blessed and fortunate to live in the land of opportunity and really excess of everything. And I love that my child has that potential. And yeah, and my community, I'm very fortunate. I have a really strong community, very supportive community. But again, it's because I work and I have a wonderful career and a lot of safety nets that allow me to do all of these things and be the mom, be the doctor, be the friend, be all these things. It's because I have support.
What is your biggest fear raising kids in America?
We have a lot of safety issues in the US. We've got astronomical numbers of gun violence. We worry about safety of our kids in school. I mean, it's commonplace that kids practice lockdown drills if somebody who shouldn't be in a school shows up. Lots of money is invested into safety. And I worry about those kinds of things. We've got so much division and hatred in this country that you just never know what could happen. And I'm not somebody who lives in fear of these things. You have to keep moving forward in life, but safety is always a big concern. School, public places, things like that. We've just had so much violence, and I think people have this just attachment to feeling like they should have their own weapon and do all these things. But I feel like there's a huge cost associated with that.
My final question is, are there any funny animal noises that you have over there? Like any animal noises that wouldn't sound the same as in English, but you speak English, so I don't know.
I feel like we would have the same ones too. I feel like the animals are probably pretty similar.
Yeah.
But gosh, we live in Texas. We live in Houston, which is very metropolitan and very diverse. It's one of the most diverse cities in the United States. But if you go out to West Texas, you'll get a thick Texas accent. We say things like y'all. It's just a good, easy word to use.
Well, I think that has covered everything.
Good. Well, I hope that was helpful.
Very helpful. I've had a great time chatting. If you've enjoyed listening to this podcast, please rate, review, and subscribe, which will help others find us. See you next week.